3 years. That's how long Claire Bennett had been working for Nathaniel Cross, a prominent yet notoriously aloof businessman who prioritized profit margins over personal connections. Claire's role as a housekeeper at his lavish estate was straightforward, and she performed her duties with precision and grace. But nothing in her years of employment had prepared her for what Nathaniel asked of her one brisk autumn afternoon. Nathaniel's company, Cross Enterprises, was on the brink of a crisis. A critical deal with influential investors teetered on the edge of collapse, and he was desperate to salvage it. His assistant had called in sick. His usual companions for such high-stakes dinners were either unavailable or unacceptable. In a moment of rare vulnerability, his eyes flickered toward Claire as she dusted the rows of antique books in his expansive office. "I need you to accompany me to a dinner tonight," he said curtly, his voice devoid of warmth or preamble. "This isn't an invitation. It's a directive. Be discreet. Stay quiet. I need someone presentable." Claire froze mid-motion, her hand still resting on a faded leather-bound volume. It was an unusual request, almost surreal, but she recognized it for what it was, an opportunity. She nodded, unsure of what the evening might hold, but aware that moments like these could change everything. When Claire arrived at the restaurant later that evening, she wore a simple, elegant black dress that belonged more to practicality than glamour. Nathaniel was already outside, pacing, his gaze fixed on his watch. He glanced at her briefly before muttering, "Let's go," and striding ahead without another word. The restaurant exuded luxury, from its polished marble floors to the soft golden lighting that bathed every corner. As they approached a table where 4 sharply dressed men and 2 women sat in hushed conversation, Claire felt their collective gaze turn toward her. Nathaniel made the introduction with mechanical precision. "This is Claire. She's with me tonight." The investors' expressions barely flickered, but Claire felt the weight of their silent judgment. She was an outsider in their world of tailored suits and veiled power plays. Still, she maintained her composure and took her seat, remembering Nathaniel's instructions to stay silent. The dinner unfolded with talk of numbers, projections, and expansions. Claire listened attentively, absorbing the jargon and the undertones that danced beneath the surface. She said nothing, content to observe, until halfway through the evening when one of the investors, Leonard Hayes, turned his attention to her. "So, Claire," Leonard said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "how does someone like you find themselves at a dinner like this?" Claire's heart quickened. She could offer a benign reply and slip back into obscurity, but something inside her resisted. She met Leonard's gaze and spoke clearly. "It's fascinating to watch how strategies are built around numbers," she said evenly. "But I've always believed understanding the people behind those numbers is just as important. Sometimes more." The table grew quiet. Nathaniel stiffened in his seat, his gaze sharp and disapproving. But Leonard looked intrigued. "An interesting perspective," Leonard remarked, leaning back in his chair. "Rarely voiced in these circles." Claire's calm, poised response shifted the dynamic. The investors, previously focused solely on Nathaniel, now looked at her with a new curiosity. Nathaniel, however, was visibly irritated. He had brought Claire to be invisible, not to command attention. Later, as the conversation veered toward corporate social responsibility, Leonard posed a question to Nathaniel. "Does Cross Enterprises have any community initiatives?" Nathaniel hesitated, then gave a vague response. "We're committed to maximizing shareholder value." Claire, however, spoke up again, her voice steady and clear. "Community initiatives are essential," she said. "They create lasting impacts that go beyond profit, building trust, loyalty, and a better future for everyone." The investors exchanged impressed glances. Leonard nodded approvingly. "Exactly my thinking," he said, his gaze flickering pointedly toward Nathaniel. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "It's easy to speak about leadership when you don't carry the burden of responsibility," he said sharply to Claire. But Claire didn't flinch. "Sometimes, those not burdened by leadership see the path more clearly," she replied. A few of the investors chuckled quietly. Nathaniel's expression hardened. When the dinner finally ended, Nathaniel left without a word, striding ahead and leaving Claire to follow. She did so with her head held high, her dignity intact. Back at the mansion, Nathaniel wasted no time summoning Claire to his office. His frustration was palpable. "What are you thinking?" he snapped. "I told you to be discreet, not to steal the spotlight." Claire's expression remained composed. "I only answered the questions I was asked, Mr. Cross," she replied. "I thought you brought me to contribute." Nathaniel laughed bitterly. "You're a housekeeper, Claire. You're not paid to have opinions at business dinners. Consider this your last day." The words cut deep, but Claire refused to show it. She nodded once, turned, and left the room. That night, as she packed her belongings, Claire told herself it was time to move on. But fate had other plans. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Leonard Hayes. "Claire, I was impressed by your insight last night," he said. "I have an opening on my team, and I believe you're the perfect fit." Claire's shock turned to resolve. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. In the months that followed, Claire flourished in her new role. Her ideas gained recognition, and her leadership was celebrated. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's company floundered. His arrogance had driven away key partners, and his refusal to adapt worsened his circumstances. The turning point came when Leonard's firm acquired a controlling stake in Cross Enterprises. At the first high-stakes meeting, Claire sat at the table alongside the other leaders. When Nathaniel entered the room, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Claire," he murmured. She met his gaze evenly. "Mr. Cross." The tension in the room was thick. Nathaniel struggled to regain his footing, but Claire presented her strategies with clarity and confidence, earning the investor's approval. After the meeting, Nathaniel confronted her. "You think you've won," he said bitterly. "This isn't about winning," Claire replied calmly. "It's about leadership, and leadership isn't about control. It's about serving others." Her words lingered long after she walked away. That night, Nathaniel stayed late, reviewing reports and replaying the choices that had led him to this point. Days later, to the surprise of many, he attended a community outreach event organized by Claire's team. There, he saw firsthand the lives transformed by the programs he had once dismissed. Slowly, Nathaniel changed. He listened more. He volunteered his time. And as he immersed himself in the community initiatives, he began to understand what Claire had been trying to show him all along. One afternoon at a youth center funded by Claire's team, Nathaniel met Jordan, a young man who had turned his life around through vocational training programs. "I used to think no one cared about kids like me," Jordan said. "But this place gave me a real chance." Nathaniel nodded silently, deeply moved. Later that night, he called Claire. "I need to do more," he said quietly. "It's not about big gestures," Claire replied. "It's about showing up again and again." And so he did. As months passed, Nathaniel's efforts grew more genuine. He attended meetings, listened to community leaders, and mentored young people. Claire, once wary, began to believe in his transformation. One evening, after a long day of work, Claire invited Nathaniel for coffee. They sat in a quiet cafe, away from their responsibilities. "You've come a long way," Claire said softly. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." Their connection deepened over time. Respect blossomed into something more profound. At a high-profile event celebrating their company's social initiatives, Nathaniel delivers speech. "In the past, I thought success was measured in profits," he said, his eyes meeting Claire's across the room. "But I've learned true success is measured by the lives we touch." The applause was thunderous, but it was Claire's nod of approval that mattered most. Their partnership thrived, both professionally and personally. Together, they expanded programs that uplifted communities. They shared late nights, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. One evening, Nathaniel found the courage to speak. "Claire, I don't know where I'd be without you. You've changed me, and I care about you deeply." Claire's gaze softened. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "But we need to protect what we've built." "One step at a time," Nathaniel agreed. Years later, they stood side by side at the grand opening of the largest community center they had ever built. "We've come so far," Nathaniel said quietly. Claire smiled, slipping her hand into his. No, Nathaniel. We've only just begun. As they looked out at the crowd, children laughing, families smiling, they knew their journey was far from over. But they were exactly where they were meant to be.